Hello. Settle in comfortably, wrap yourself up warmly, and let the gentle whisper of stories carry you into a deep, peaceful sleep. The year is 1849. A crisp spring morning cloaks Washington, D.C. in a delicate mist, yet an unmistakable scent hangs heavy in the air, not of cherry blossoms, but of something far more unconventional. Imagine standing beside the newly inaugurated 12th President of the United States, Zachary Taylor, a hero of the Mexican-American War, as he endures the lengthy ceremonies. What you couldn't see, or perhaps smell, was the true peculiarity of his predicament. A prevailing, though unverified, anecdote suggests Taylor, a man deeply attached to his military uniform, had it packed away for storage after the inaugural ball. On March 5, 1849, the day he was sworn in, an unexpected downpour forced him to retrieve it. This garment, having housed him through rugged campaigns and now, reportedly, infested with vermin and emitting a rather potent odor, became a subtle, yet perhaps symbolic, introduction to a presidency shrouded in unusual circumstances. Taylor, a career military man with no prior political office or deep understanding of national policy, ascended to the highest office as a reluctant leader. His entire political experience amounted to never having voted in any election before his own. This lack of political acumen immediately set him apart from his predecessors, a group largely comprised of seasoned statesmen. Historian Alan Nevins, in Ordeal of the Union, meticulously details Taylor's intellectual disengagement from legislative processes, often deferring completely to his cabinet, or simply failing to grasp the nuances of congressional debate. His short, 16-month tenure was dominated by the escalating crisis over slavery and westward expansion, with Taylor championing admission of California and New Mexico as free states, a stance that surprised many Southern allies. This seemingly radical position for a Virginian-born Louisiana slave owner highlights the unpredictable nature that would define his brief time in power. The scent of an old uniform, perhaps, was but a faint prelude to the potent aroma of change and the heavy weight of expectations placed upon a man ill-prepared for the political tempest brewing in the nation's capital. President Zachary Taylor, a man of stark paradoxes, carried the informal moniker Old Rough and Ready into the presidency, a testament to his military exploits and unvarnished demeanor. This rough and ready persona, however, translated awkwardly into the refined political theatre of Washington, D.C. Historians, like Bruce Catton, have often highlighted Taylor's preference for simple country clothes over formal attire, even for significant state functions, a stark contrast to the expected presidential gravitas. This seemingly minor detail underscored a deeper, more profound disconnect. A general who commanded armies with decisive authority now grappled with the nuanced, often frustrating negotiations of legislative compromise. His public image was a confounding blend of frontier pragmatism and surprising political naivete. For instance, Taylor, despite owning a Louisiana plantation worked by enslaved people, staunchly opposed the expansion of slavery into new territories. This position, detailed in his private correspondence and public declarations, alienated Southern Democrats who had supported his candidacy based on his background, creating a political chasm that he struggled to bridge. Dr. Michael F. Holt, in The Rise and Fall of the American Whig Party, meticulously analyzes how Taylor's inflexibility on the slavery issue, particularly his insistence on immediate statehood for California and New Mexico without congressional conditions, directly contributed to the sectional crisis. This approach, while perhaps driven by a genuine desire to preserve the Union, was seen by many as authoritarian and insensitive to Southern grievances. Imagine the frustration within his own Whig party. They had elected a war hero, hoping for a unifying figure, only to find a president who often acted independently, consulting little with party leaders and resisting established political conventions. This independence, while admirable in a military context, proved challenging in governance. Taylor's presidency, though tragically short, stands as a testament to the unpredictable nature of leadership and the profound personal contradictions that can reside within a figure of immense power. The whispers of this paradox, the burden of a crown unworn by political tradition, ultimately contributed to the intense pressures that defined his brief, impactful time in office, foreshadowing the deeper divisions that would soon tear the nation apart. From the sudden tragic end of Zachary Taylor's presidency in July 1850, emerged Millard Fillmore, his vice president, inheriting a deeply fractured nation. Fillmore's ascent was not one of grand ambition or popular mandate, but rather a somber, unexpected transition. Born in a log cabin in Cayuga County, New York, in 1800, Fillmore's early life embodied the quintessential American narrative of rising from humble beginnings. His family was impoverished, and his education was sporadic, primarily self-taught. This background strongly shaped his worldview, fostering a deep respect for industry, self-improvement, and perhaps a somewhat reserved and cautious approach to leadership. Unlike the rough and ready persona of his predecessor, Fillmore cultivated an image of quiet intellectualism and meticulous order. He was largely unknown to the broader American public upon assuming the highest office. Before becoming vice president, Fillmore served as a U.S. congressman from New York and, crucially, as chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, demonstrating a grasp of intricate financial policy. He was also instrumental in establishing the University of Buffalo, reflecting a lifelong commitment to education and civic betterment. These experiences, however, did not prepare him for the immense political turbulence that defined the mid-19th century. Historian Robert Rayback, in Millard Fillmore, Biography of a President, notes Fillmore's diligent, almost bureaucratic approach to his duties, often poring over documents late into the night. The primary challenge inherited by Fillmore was the Compromise of 1850, a package of 5 separate bills designed to address the escalating sectional crisis over slavery. His predecessor, Taylor, had opposed key elements of the compromise, creating a stalemate. Fillmore, however, recognizing the immediate threat of national dissolution, dramatically shifted the presidential stance. He used his influence, particularly regarding the Fugitive Slave Act, in a bid to preserve the Union. This decision, though politically pragmatic at the time, would prove monumentally divisive and forever impact his historical legacy. This rural-born, self-made man, thrust into the presidency, was about to taste the bitter humility of leadership during an era where compromise often felt like capitulation, and national unity hung by the thinnest of threads. Beneath Millard Fillmore's meticulously tailored suits and the iconic top hat, a symbol of his refined image, lay the unseen scars of a life forged in the unforgiving American frontier. While previous presidents often boasted military accolades, Fillmore's trials came not from battlefields, but from raw physical labor and intellectual ambition. Born into abject poverty in a log cabin in upstate New York, his early life was characterized by relentless toil on his father's subsistence farm. This first-hand experience of extreme hardship, where every meal was earned through strenuous effort, instilled in him a deep understanding of the common man's struggles. At the age of 14, Fillmore was apprenticed to a cloth dresser and then a carder, laboring in harsh conditions for years. This period, as historian Elbert B. Smith notes in President Fillmore, a biography, honed his discipline and ambition. In a remarkable display of self-determination, he bought out his apprenticeship for $30, a sum he earned by teaching school. He then pursued legal studies, initially clerking for a local judge, largely educating himself by devouring every book he could find. This arduous intellectual journey, culminating in his admission to the bar in 1823, highlights an individual driven by an extraordinary desire for self-improvement and knowledge, overcoming systemic disadvantages through sheer force of will. These early struggles left an indelible mark. Fillmore was known for his stoicism and reserved nature, qualities often misinterpreted as coldness or aloofness. Yet, they were perhaps the natural defense mechanisms of a person who had navigated a harsh world largely on his own. His meticulous attention to detail, his methodical approach to policy, and his underlying conservatism can be traced back to this foundational period. The Compromise of 1850, which he signed into law, was a testament to his belief in stability and order above all else, even if it meant endorsing deeply unpopular provisions like the Fugitive Slave Act. For Fillmore, the wilderness of his youth was not just a geographic location. It was a crucible that shaped a president who, for better or worse, consistently sought to hold a fractious nation together, even if the methods he employed left enduring societal wounds. The mid-19th century, a period of profound national flux following the Compromise of 1850, presented a political landscape ripe for figures both conventional and eccentric. Amidst this climate, one individual distinguished himself not solely by policy, but by a striking personal characteristic, a profound and persistent stutter. Senator James Buchanan of Pennsylvania, a prominent Democrat, possessed a remarkable intellect and extensive experience in both domestic and foreign policy, having served in the House of Representatives, the Senate, and as Secretary of State under President James K. Polk. Yet, his public speaking, a cornerstone of political life, was often a torturous affair. Buchanan's stutter was more than a mere speech impediment. It was a defining feature that shaped his interactions and public perception. Contemporary accounts, detailed in biographies such as Gene H. Baker's James Buchanan, frequently mention the noticeable pauses, repetitions, and vocal blocks that punctuated his addresses. While some found it frustrating, others saw it as a sign of his deliberate thought process, lending gravity to his words once they finally emerged. Despite this impediment, Buchanan was renowned for his forensic skill in debate and his persuasive abilities in private conversation. He was a master of legal argument, carefully constructing his points even when delivery proved challenging. His political career, spanning over 40 years before his presidency, showcased a man deeply enmeshed in the political machinery of the day. As Minister to Great Britain in the early 1850s, he was instrumental in crafting the Ostend Manifesto, a controversial proposal for the acquisition of Cuba from Spain. This move, revealing a certain aggressive expansionist streak, stood in stark contrast to the cautious oratorical style often dictated by his speech patterns. The echo of history would soon place this complex, stuttering orator in the most powerful office in the land, on the precipice of the nation's gravest internal conflict. His personal communications and meticulous records often reveal an almost obsessive desire for clarity and precision, perhaps a direct consequence of his struggle with verbal articulation. His journey to the presidency was not merely a political story. but a testament to the perseverance of an individual who overcame a significant personal challenge to reach the pinnacle of American power, only to confront a challenge of national survival far greater than any individual impediment. James Buchanan, a man of considerable political experience and intellectual rigor, ascended to the presidency in 1857 with a vision of national unity. Yet, his tenure almost immediately became synonymous with a leadership paralysis that plunged the nation deeper into crisis. Despite his impressive resume in foreign diplomacy and domestic policy, Buchanan's presidency is historically viewed as one of the most ineffective, marred by his inability to decisively address the escalating sectional tensions over slavery. This fragile grip on power, an illusion of control, cast a long shadow of doubt over his decisions, and indeed, over the future of the Republic. One of the most profound instances of this fragile grip was his handling of the Dred Scott versus Sandford Supreme Court decision in March 1857, just 2 days after his inauguration. Buchanan, through private communication, actively pressured 2 Supreme Court justices to rule against Scott, believing that a definitive legal resolution would quell the slavery debate. Instead, the court's ruling, which declared African Americans were not citizens and that Congress could not prohibit slavery in territories, ignited widespread outrage in the North and emboldened the South. As historian Kenneth M. Stamp details in America in 1857, a nation on the brink, Buchanan's involvement stripped the decision of any perceived neutrality and intensified pre-existing divisions, pushing the country further towards disunion. His efforts to resolve the Kansas-Nebraska Act's violent aftermath, specifically the Lecompton Constitution, further exposed his weak leadership. Buchanan endorsed this pro-slavery constitution, despite clear evidence of electoral fraud and widespread opposition from Kansans, alienating his own Democratic Party and further polarizing Congress. This strategic misjudgment, rooted in a desire to appease the South, destroyed any remaining political capital he might have had in the North. Imagine the irony. A president with decades of experience in navigating complex political waters, proving uniquely unable to steer the nation through its greatest storm. Buchanan's inability to project strong, unified leadership during this pivotal moment represents a profound paradox. The shadow of doubt that followed his every decision ultimately contributed to the irreconcilable differences that would plunge the United States into civil war just weeks after he left office. James Buchanan holds a unique distinction among American presidents. He remains the only one to never marry. This personal circumstance, while seemingly private, profoundly influenced his social life, his public image, and arguably the burdens he carried into the nation's highest office. In a 19th century society where marriage was an expected cornerstone of respectability and conventional leadership, Buchanan's lifelong bachelorhood set him apart, fostering a sense of isolation that perhaps exacerbated the immense pressures of his presidency. Born in 1791, Buchanan's personal life was marked by a tragic incident in his youth. In 1819, he became engaged to Anne Caroline Coleman, but their relationship was plagued by disagreements and societal pressures. Coleman, suffering from what contemporaries described as emotional distress, broke off the engagement and died shortly thereafter, officially by suicide. This profound loss, combined with public accusations from Coleman's family regarding his alleged lack of affection, left an indelible mark on Buchanan. As historian Philip Klein details in President James Buchanan, a biography, this event fundamentally altered his approach to personal relationships, leading him to largely retreat from romantic pursuits and dedicate himself to a career in public service. This bachelor's burden meant that Buchanan lacked the traditional support system of a First Lady, a social partner and confidant who often provided emotional stability and managed the White House's social functions. Instead, his niece, Harriet Lane, admirably filled the role of White House hostess, earning the admiration of Washington society. However, the emotional and intellectual labor of leadership often thrives on intimate, trusting relationships, and for Buchanan, this sphere was largely absent. His closest associates were political allies, not familial anchors. This personal isolation, coupled with his cautious and often indecisive political style, created an aura of detachment. In the crucible of the secession crisis, this chill of isolation may have prevented him from forming the robust personal alliances and public appeals necessary to unite a fractured nation. His personal sacrifice for a public life, intended perhaps to shield him from further emotional pain, ultimately left him more exposed to the harsh glare of political criticism and the crushing weight of a nation unraveling. Beneath the public gaze, behind the heavy velvet curtains of diplomacy and presidential duties, lay a fascinating element of James Buchanan's life that continues to intrigue historians: his unusually close and enduring relationship with Senator William Rufus King. King, a prominent Democratic senator from Alabama and later vice president under Franklin Pierce, was a longtime intimate of Buchanan. For over 15 years, from the 1830s to the 1850s, they shared a house in Washington, D.C., a living arrangement that was far from common for prominent bachelors of their era. This domestic partnership, often referred to by contemporaries in veiled and suggestive terms, such as Siamese twins and Aunt Fancy for King, has fueled extensive historical speculation regarding the true nature of their bond. The historical record, while not conclusive by modern standards, offers tantalizing glimpses. Letters exchanged between Buchanan and King, analyzed by scholars like James W. Lowen in Lies My Teacher Told Me, reveal a deeply affectionate and interdependent relationship. Buchanan, while minister to Russia, wrote to King, "I am now solitary and alone, having no companion in the house with me. I have gone a-wooing to several gentlemen, but have not succeeded with any one of them. I feel that it is not good for man to be alone, and should not be astonished to find myself married to some old maid who can nurse me when I am sick, provide good dinners for me when I am well, and not expect from me any very great amount of attention." While perhaps couched in humor, such expressions hint at a longing for companionship that King evidently fulfilled. Their relationship, whatever its precise nature, existed in a societal context where such intimacy between men was often tolerated or simply unspoken, particularly if it facilitated political alliances and social stability. It offered Buchanan a consistent personal confidant, a sounding board for the immense pressures of public life. In an era where political maneuvering and personal trust were inextricably linked, the stability of their bond likely provided a crucial anchor for Buchanan's career. The details remain behind the velvet curtain of history, drawing us to the lure of the unknown and reminding us that beneath the formal narratives of statecraft, the private lives of presidents often hold the most compelling and sometimes unanswerable questions about their eccentricities and ultimate legacies. The echoes of James Buchanan's indecisive leadership dissolved into the roar of national crisis, setting the stage for one of America's most pivotal and indeed eccentric figures. Born in Hodgenville, Kentucky on February 12, 1809, Abraham Lincoln's distinctive Southern Illinois drawl a legacy of his childhood migrations, would become emblematic of a man profoundly connected to the diverse American landscape. This unique speech pattern, often described as high-pitched and slightly shrill by contemporaries, was frequently misunderstood or even ridiculed. Yet, it was the voice of a man who would navigate the nation through its darkest hour, embodying a different kind of strangeness, the unconventional leader forged by unconventional means. Lincoln's early life was a tapestry of hardship and self-education, far removed from the Ivy League pedigree of many of his presidential predecessors. He spent less than a year in formal schooling, his intellect honed by voraciously reading by firelight and engaging in spirited debates in rural general stores. This self-made intellectual, a rail splitter from the frontier, carried with him the dust of compromise. Not necessarily political compromise in his formative years, but the everyday compromises required for survival, for community, and for establishing order in a developing nation. His legal career in Illinois, beginning in 1836, was marked by a reputation for honesty, sharp wit, and a profound understanding of human nature, skills that would prove invaluable on the national stage. As historian Doris Kearns Goodwin details in Team of Rivals, Lincoln cultivated a political style deeply rooted in persuasion, storytelling, and an uncanny ability to connect with ordinary Americans. His seemingly rustic demeanor and anecdotal speaking style were often underestimated by his more refined political opponents. However, it was precisely these qualities, combined with an unwavering moral compass, that allowed him to articulate the existential threat facing the Union with unprecedented clarity. The Southern drawl, the homespun humor, the towering, somewhat awkward physical presence. These eccentricities were not impediments, but integral components of a leader who, despite his personal struggles and unorthodox path, was uniquely equipped to confront the nation's profound divisions. He represented a stark departure from the polished politicians of the East, a true embodiment of the American experiment's capacity to elevate an unexpected, singularly strange individual to guide its destiny. Abraham Lincoln stepped into the presidency in March 1861, not merely as a political leader, but as the inheritor of a nation in mortal peril. 7 southern states had already seceded from the Union, declaring themselves the Confederate States of America. The very foundation of the Republic trembled under the weight of irreconcilable differences, primarily over the institution of slavery. Lincoln's election, without a single Southern electoral vote, served as the final catalyst for this dramatic rupture. His unwavering commitment to the principle that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth, would define his every action. Upon his inauguration, Lincoln found Fort Sumter, a federal installation in Charleston, South Carolina, under siege by Confederate forces. His decision to resupply the fort rather than abandon it was a calculated risk that, predictably, led to its bombardment on April 12, 1861. This act ignited the American Civil War, a conflict that would claim over 620,000 lives and forever transform the nation. The ghost of rebellion had materialized into a devastating reality, forcing Lincoln to confront the unimaginable. Brothers fighting brothers, states aligned against states, all fueled by fundamental disagreements over human liberty and federal authority. Lincoln's administration was characterized by unprecedented executive action. He suspended habeas corpus, issued the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, and oversaw the mobilization of a massive federal army. These were not the actions of a cautious politician, but of a transformative leader willing to bend constitutional norms in defense of the Union. His personal struggles, documented by his private secretaries John Nicolay and John Hay, reveal a president burdened by crushing responsibility, often spending sleepless nights in the War Department telegraph office, poring over dispatches from the front lines. The profound melancholy that often shadowed Lincoln, a condition recognized by his contemporaries, deepened during the war years, reflecting the immense personal and national cost of defending principles. This strange, often underestimated man, who once split rails and argued cases in dusty courthouses, bore the ultimate price of principle, guiding a deeply divided nation through an unimaginable crucible, fundamentally altering the course of American history. From the ashes of the Civil War and the profound tragedy of Lincoln's assassination emerged a different kind of leader, one whose eccentricity manifested not in personal quirks, but in an almost obsessive devotion to technological advancement. Ulysses S. Grant, the victorious Union general who became the 18th President of the United States in 1869, harbored a lifelong fascination with invention and machinery. This peculiar passion, often overshadowed by his military prowess and later his political challenges, provides a unique lens through which to understand his character and vision for a post-war America. Grant's inventive wit was not merely a hobby. It was an ingrained aspect of his personality. As a young officer, he experimented with various mechanical devices. One of the most documented examples of this ingenuity is his early attempt to design a system for transporting timber more efficiently. While at Fort Vancouver, Washington Territory, in the early 1850s, he designed a multi-wheeled cart intended to haul heavy logs over uneven terrain, an invention that, while not widely adopted, demonstrated his practical and innovative mind. He recognized the potential for technology to improve efficiency and overcome logistical challenges, a trait that served him well on the battlefield. This spark of progress continued into his presidency. Grant was an eager adopter of new technologies and saw government's role in fostering industrial growth and scientific discovery. He oversaw the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad in 1869, a monumental achievement that physically united the nation he had saved. He also championed the establishment of the U.S. Fish Commission, recognizing the importance of scientific management of natural resources. His administration was marked by an emphasis on infrastructure and technological modernization, areas where his natural curiosity and practical intellect found fertile ground. As historian H.W. Brands observes, Grant's fascination with progress was a counterpoint to the political turmoil of Reconstruction, a belief in the tangible advancements that could rebuild and strengthen a shattered nation. This quiet general, often perceived as stoic and straightforward, actually possessed a restless, inventive mind, constantly seeking improvements and new solutions, embodying a distinctly American pragmatism driven by a quiet yet persistent spark of progress. Ulysses S. Grant's presidency, deeply entwined with the nation's ambitious stride towards industrialization, became a platform for his innate fascination with technology and innovation. His personal interest in intricate mechanisms and their practical applications translated into government policies that actively fostered the gears of destiny, the machinery of a modernizing America. Grant embraced the jolt of the new, often personally engaging with inventors and advocating for advancements that would integrate a war-torn nation into the emerging global industrial age. One of the most striking examples of Grant's technological curiosity was his enthusiasm for railroads and telegraphs. Having observed their strategic importance during the Civil War, he understood their civilian potential. He was the first president to extensively use a telegraph in the White House, often engaging directly with operators and demonstrating a keen interest in its mechanics. Historian Brooks D. Simpson notes that Grant's practical experience with transportation challenges during military campaigns imbued him with a unique appreciation for infrastructure development. This wasn't merely abstract policy. It was driven by an individual who believed fundamentally in the power of physical connection to unite and advance society. Under Grant's administration, the United States made significant strides in post-Civil War reconstruction and westward expansion, heavily reliant on technological progress. The completion of the Union Pacific and Central Pacific Railroads in 1869, forming the first transcontinental railroad, was a monumental achievement directly supported by his government. This engineering marvel drastically reduced travel time across the continent, facilitating trade, migration, and communication. Furthermore, Grant's embrace of scientific exploration led to the establishment of the first national parks, like Yellowstone, reflecting a nascent understanding of environmental preservation alongside a push for resource development. He actively promoted scientific surveys of the American West, employing trained experts to chart and understand the nation's untapped potential. Grant, the Stoic general, was paradoxically also a forward-thinking technocrat, his leadership embodying a quiet but profound commitment to innovation. His presidency, therefore, illustrates how a leader's personal quirks, even an eccentricity like a deep love for mechanics, can subtly but significantly shape national policy and leave an enduring mark on a nation's trajectory. In the late 19th century, as the nation grappled with industrial growth and lingering post-Reconstruction tensions, a figure emerged whose personality was as impactful as his policies. Theodore Roosevelt, the 26th President of the United States, was a force of nature, a man whose public persona was meticulously crafted, yet undeniably authentic. One of his most defining and often remarked upon characteristics was his booming, infectious laugh, a sound so powerful, so unrestrained, that it became a signature element of his leadership style and an echo of his personal authority. Born in New York City in 1858, Roosevelt's early life was marked by chronic asthma and a frail constitution. Rather than succumb to his physical limitations, he embarked on a regimented program of vigorous exercise, embracing what he termed the strenuous life. This self-transformation from a sickly youth to a robust, almost superhuman figure became central to his mythos. His laugh, described by contemporaries as a great, gleeful, almost terrifying bellow, was the audible manifestation of this vitality. It wasn't merely amusement. It was often a statement, a punctuation mark on a forceful argument, or a convivial invitation to engage. Historian Edmund Morris, in his extensive biographies of Roosevelt, frequently emphasizes the visceral impact of this laughter, noting how it could simultaneously intimidate opponents and charm allies. Roosevelt's career was a whirlwind of diverse experiences. New York State Assemblyman, cattle rancher in the Dakota Territory, New York City Police Commissioner, Assistant Secretary of the Navy, Rough Rider in the Spanish-American War, and Governor of New York, before ascending to the Vice Presidency and then the Presidency following William McKinley's assassination in 1901. In each role, his distinctive personality, including his loud laughter, helped him project an image of unstoppable energy and unwavering moral conviction. He wielded his formidable persona as deftly as he did his intellect, using his humor and jovial nature to connect with the public and disarm political adversaries. It was an outward sign of an inner determination, a powerful declaration of his presence and his belief in his own authority. The echo of that loud laugh resonates through history, signaling a president who reshaped not only the office, but also the very notion of what a powerful American leader could be, a man of intellect, action, and undeniable, boisterous charm. Theodore Roosevelt, the quintessential larger-than-life figure, understood the power of public performance with an almost theatrical flair. From wrestling on the White House lawn to inviting renowned boxer John L. Sullivan for sparring sessions, his every public action seemed designed to reinforce his image as TR, the dynamic, robust leader. This masterful performance, celebrated in countless articles and photographs, captivated the American public and redefined the presidency for the dawning age of mass media. Yet, beneath this carefully constructed spotlight lay a lesser-known aspect, a personal and political life occasionally shadowed by accusations of hypocrisy, a pang of dissonance between the ideal and the reality. One notable instance of this perceived hypocrisy was Roosevelt's fervent advocacy for the strenuous life, physically demanding activities, and the virtues of the frontier. This was a core tenet of his philosophy, inspiring countless young Americans. However, critics sometimes pointed to his privileged upbringing and access to wealth, questioning the authenticity of his self-made rugged image. While he genuinely embraced and thrived in demanding physical challenges, his ability to do so was arguably facilitated by a network of resources unavailable to the average citizen. Historian Kathleen Dalton, in Theodore Roosevelt, A Strenuous Life, acknowledges that while Roosevelt genuinely lived his strenuous ethos, the narrative of his transformation from a sickly child to robust cowboy activist was also a powerful, politically useful myth. Furthermore, his progressive stances on corporate regulation and environmental conservation, while genuinely trailblazing, sometimes conflicted with the less savory realities of his political alliances. While he busted trusts and preserved millions of acres of federal land, his administration also made pragmatic compromises with powerful industrial interests, decisions that were often necessary to achieve legislative success, but sometimes sparked accusations of abandoning his loftier principles. Imagine Roosevelt, the ardent conservationist, dining with timber barons whose practices he publicly denounced. A delicate balance between idealism and political necessity. This tension between the public performance of virtue and the intricate, often morally ambiguous, compromises of governance created a subtle pang of hypocrisy. It reminds us that even the most charismatic and principled leaders operate within complex systems, where upholding an ideal often involves navigating difficult realities, forcing compromises that can challenge the very image they project. This duality, the performance versus the practicalities, forms an essential, if often overlooked, layer of Roosevelt's multifaceted legacy. Following the dynamic, almost theatrical presidency of Theodore Roosevelt, the nation turned to a figure of starkly different temperament and intellectual background. Woodrow Wilson, the 28th President of the United States, was a scholar, a professor, and a university president before he entered politics. His presidency, from 1913 to 1921, was marked by a profound intellectual rigor, a methodical approach to governance, and a deep conviction in his own moral and analytical correctness. This professor's gaze, as it became known, was an eccentricity of intellect, shaping his leadership with both brilliance and, at times, inflexibility. Born in Staunton, Virginia, in 1856, Wilson was the son of a Presbyterian minister, an upbringing that instilled in him a strong sense of moral purpose and a belief in the power of rhetoric. He earned his doctorate in political science from Johns Hopkins University in 1886, becoming a distinguished academic at Bryn Mawr, Wesleyan, and finally Princeton University, where he served as its president from 1902 to 1910. His academic career was characterized by meticulous research, clear argumentation, and a deep understanding of political systems. These intellectual habits, so essential in academia, were seamlessly transferred to the White House. He approached policy debates as if they were scholarly arguments, seeking logical consistency and principled conclusions. Wilson's early political career as governor of New Jersey demonstrated his willingness to challenge entrenched political machines through principled reform. In the White House, he systematically implemented his New Freedom agenda, including the Clayton Antitrust Act, the Federal Reserve Act, and the creation of the Federal Trade Commission, a testament to his intellectual capacity to conceive and execute complex legislative programs. Biographer A. Scott Berg highlights Wilson's reliance on his personal judgment and intellectual conviction, often shunning traditional political horse trading in favor of what he believed was objectively right. Imagine a president meticulously outlining a policy on a blackboard, much as he lectured his students, convinced that the sheer logic of his arguments would prevail. This weight of intellect, while enabling him to articulate grand visions like the League of Nations, also contributed to a certain aloofness and an occasional difficulty in compromising with those who did not share his rigorous analytical framework. His intellectual distinctiveness set him apart, making him a truly unique and at times challenging figure in the pantheon of American presidents. Woodrow Wilson's presidency, deeply rooted in his academic background, exemplified the clash between the lofty ideals forged in the ivory tower and the often unyielding chill of political reality. His philosophical approach to governance, derived from years of scholarly study and theoretical frameworks, was a defining characteristic. He entered the White House with a meticulously articulated vision for domestic reform and international relations, believing that rational thought and moral principles could guide the nation, and indeed the world, towards a more just and peaceful future. This academic temperament, however, also proved to be his greatest vulnerability. Wilson, as biographer John Milton Cooper Jr. argues, often exhibited a profound disinterest in the transactional politics of Washington, D.C., viewing political maneuvering and compromise as beneath the dignity of his grander objectives. His initial reluctance to engage deeply with congressional leaders, particularly during the critical debates surrounding American entry into World War I, exemplifies this. He preferred to appeal directly to the public, believing that the sheer force of his ideas and the moral imperative behind them would sway opinion. This approach worked brilliantly for some of his domestic policies, such as the Federal Reserve Act, but faltered spectacularly when faced with entrenched opposition. The most poignant illustration of ideals colliding with harsh reality occurred with his ambitious proposal for the League of Nations. Wilson envisioned this international body as a genuine mechanism for preventing future wars, a cornerstone of his 14 points for lasting peace. His unwavering belief in its necessity led him to embark on a grueling cross-country speaking tour to rally public support, sidestepping the Senate, which he later refused to compromise with on crucial reservations for ratification. This staunch idealism, a product of his professor's gaze, ultimately led to the League's rejection by the U.S. Senate in 1919 and 1920. effectively dooming America's participation in an organization he had singular-handedly championed. Imagine the scene: a man of immense intellect, armed with meticulously crafted arguments, standing before a resistant Senate, unwilling to yield even an inch on what he considered fundamental principles. The chill of reality, Senate politics, nationalistic sentiments, and partisan animosity proved an insurmountable barrier, leaving a legacy of intellectual triumph overshadowed by political defeat. Wilson's tragedy lies in this very collision. A brilliant mind, perfectly suited for the theoretical construct of governance, struggling to adapt to the messy, imperfect world of practical politics. As the turbulent era of World War I receded, and the nation hurtled into the unprecedented prosperity and social upheaval of the 1920s, a figure of striking contrast stood at the helm: Calvin Coolidge. The 30th President of the United States, known universally as Silent Cal, embodied an eccentricity not of boisterous personality or intellectual grandiosity, but of profound reticence. His taciturn nature seemed almost paradoxical against the backdrop of the Roaring Twenties, an era defined by jazz music, flapper culture, and a celebration of modern excess. Yet, this very quietude became his hallmark, and surprisingly, a source of his public appeal. Born in Plymouth Notch, Vermont in 1872, Coolidge's New England roots instilled in him a deep-seated frugality, pragmatism, and a distrust of superfluous speech. His political career, which began at the local level and progressed through the Massachusetts state legislature, lieutenant governorship, and governorship, prepared him for the national stage. His stern, unsmiling demeanor and monosyllabic responses to questions became legendary even before his presidency. Biographer Amity Shlaes, in Coolidge, meticulously documents numerous anecdotes of his extreme reluctance to speak, often turning press conferences into awkward silences, broken only by his occasional dry witticisms. Coolidge's ascent to the presidency in 1923, following the sudden death of Warren G. Harding, thrust this exceptionally quiet man into the White House during a period of intense public excitement and economic boom. His philosophy, often summarized as "the business of America is business," perfectly resonated with the prevailing laissez-faire ethos of the decade. He signed legislation reducing income taxes, promoting economic growth, and limiting government intervention, policies largely favored by the booming industrial sector. The public, weary of Wilson's idealism and Harding's scandals, perhaps found comfort in Coolidge's stoic, no-nonsense approach. His silence, far from being a weakness, became a symbol of stability and trustworthiness in a rapidly changing world. Imagine the stark contrast: the loud, vibrant dance halls and speakeasies roaring with life, while in the executive mansion, the President of the United States presided with an almost Zen-like tranquility, his silence echoing an unspoken assurance that things were indeed under control. This unique blend of personal reticence and national exuberance defines Silent Cal as one of the truly strange, yet surprisingly effective, leaders of his time. Calvin Coolidge's famous taciturnity was not merely a personal quirk. It was a deliberate and effective political strategy, transforming his quiet demeanor into a powerful tool of governance. In an era when public relations was just beginning to emerge as a political science, Coolidge skillfully wielded the power of absence to project an image of thoughtful deliberation and conservative prudence. His measured words, carefully chosen and sparse, often carried more weight than the effusive declarations of his contemporaries, echoing a whisper of change in how presidential communication was received. Biographers frequently recount anecdotes illustrating Coolidge's economic use of language. One famous story involves a persistent reporter challenging him to say more than 2 words to them. Coolidge reportedly replied, "You lose." This succinctness, while amusing, served a vital purpose. In the aftermath of World War I and the Harding administration's Teapot Dome scandal, the American public craved stability and a return to normalcy. Coolidge's quiet presence and conservative fiscal policies provided just that. He was seen as a safe pair of hands, a bulwark against the perceived excesses of both wartime government and political corruption. Historian Robert Zeigler, in Coolidge, An American Enigma, argues that his silence fostered an aura of gravitas and wisdom, leading people to believe he was always carefully considering issues before speaking, even if, at times, he had little to say. His presidency saw significant economic growth and technological advancement, epitomized by the widespread adoption of automobiles, radios, and household appliances. Coolidge's economic policies, characterized by tax cuts and reduced government spending, were credited by many contemporaries for fueling this prosperity. He signed the Revenue Act of 1924 and 1926, which substantially lowered income and inheritance taxes, aligning with his belief in minimal government interference in the economy. While these policies are now viewed with more critical hindsight, having arguably contributed to the unsustainable boom leading to the Great Depression, at the time, his measured approach was celebrated. The nation was undergoing profound social shifts, yet its president, with his deliberate quietude, offered a reassuring counterpoint to the rapid-fire changes. His public reserve, his rare public statements, and his careful avoidance of unnecessary pronouncements created a space where the noise of the Roaring Twenties could perhaps be heard more clearly, allowing the underlying currents of change to flow, seemingly unguided, yet implicitly endorsed by the silence at the top. From the deliberate silence of Calvin Coolidge, the nation lurched into an era defined by economic catastrophe, bringing to the forefront a president whose personal struggle paralleled the nation's own. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the 32nd President of the United States, was an embodiment of buoyant optimism, a characteristic that became both his greatest political asset and a source of profound inspiration during the direst economic crisis in American history. His famous optimist smile, often captured in photographs and newsreels, presented a stark contrast to the grim reality of the Great Depression, a bitter taste that lingered on the American palate. Born into wealth and privilege in Hyde Park, New York, in 1882, Roosevelt's life took a dramatic turn in 1921 when he contracted poliomyelitis, leaving him permanently paralyzed from the waist down. This devastating personal blow, however, forged in him a resilience and an empathy that would later define his presidency. He meticulously worked to regain physical strength, often engaging in strenuous efforts at his Warm Springs, Georgia, rehabilitation center. This personal struggle profoundly informed his understanding of hardship and his refusal to succumb to despair. As historian Jeffrey C. Ward details in A First-Class Temperament the emergence of Franklin Roosevelt, his illness taught him patience, courage, and a deeper connection to the struggles of ordinary people. Elected president in 1932 amidst widespread economic destitution, unemployment, and social unrest, Roosevelt confronted a nation gripped by fear. His inaugural address in March 1933, with its iconic declaration that "the only thing we have to fear is fear itself," immediately sought to instill hope. This was not mere rhetoric. It was a deeply held conviction rooted in his own battle against paralysis. his distinctive cigarette holder cocked upwards, his head back in a hearty laugh, his broad smile. These were carefully cultivated public images, but they fundamentally sprang from an inner wellspring of genuine optimism. While his policies, the New Deal, were revolutionary and complex, his most immediate and perhaps enduring impact was psychological. He gave a broken nation courage. That optimist smile against the backdrop of breadlines and Hoovervilles was an eccentricity of spirit, a testament to the power of positive leadership, even when confronted with the bitterest taste of economic collapse. It signaled a profound shift in presidential demeanor, a vibrant energy replacing the quietude of his predecessor, ready to tackle unprecedented challenges. Franklin Delano Roosevelt's New Deal policies, enacted with a fervor and speed unprecedented in American history, were a direct, forceful response to the acute suffering inflicted by the Great Depression. This collection of federal programs aimed to provide relief, recovery, and reform to a nation teetering on the brink of social collapse. His administration, through bold experimentation, sought to ignite hope's flicker in the hearts of millions, contrasting sharply with the pervasive chill of hunger and desperation that had settled across the land. Within his first 100 days in office, a flurry of legislation reshaped the American economic and social landscape. On March 9, 1933, the Emergency Banking Act was signed, temporarily closing all banks to prevent further failures and restore public confidence. This was immediately followed by the establishment of the Civilian Conservation Corps, CCC, which put hundreds of thousands of young, unemployed men to work on environmental conservation projects, from building parks to planting trees. The Federal Emergency Relief Administration, FERA, provided direct aid to the jobless, while the Agricultural Adjustment Act, AAA, sought to stabilize agricultural prices and support distressed farmers. These rapid interventions, as detailed by historian Arthur M. Schlesinger Jr. in The Age of Roosevelt, showcased a president willing to innovate dramatically to address a crisis of unparalleled scale. These programs were not without their critics, both then and now, but their immediate impact was undeniable. They provided tangible relief, food, employment, and a sense of purpose. Imagine the despair of a family in 1932, facing starvation and homelessness, then the faint stirring of hope as a CCC job opens up for their son, or a FERA check arrives in the mail. These were more than just economic measures. They were psychological lifelines. The Tennessee Valley Authority, TVA, established in 1933, brought electricity and economic development to one of the poorest regions of the country, transforming lives and landscapes. The Public Works Administration, PWA, and later the Works Progress Administration, WPA, initiated vast infrastructure projects, building bridges, schools, and hospitals across the nation, putting millions back to work. While the New Deal did not single-handedly end the Great Depression, World War II ultimately provided that impetus. It dramatically alleviated suffering, prevented societal breakdown, and fundamentally reshaped the role of the federal government in American life. Through an eclectic mix of programs and a persistent message of optimism, Roosevelt's New Deal breathed life into the flicker of hope, challenging the pervasive chill of hunger with an unprecedented embrace of social responsibility. As the echoes of World War II faded and the Cold War dawned, a new kind of leader emerged, shaped not by politics or academia, but by the visceral challenges of military command and a profound connection to the sea. John F. Kennedy, the 35th President of the United States, was an embodiment of the fighter's spirit. a man for whom courage in the face of adversity was not merely rhetoric, but deeply ingrained experience. His physical and mental resilience, forged in the crucible of naval combat, imbued him with an aura of unwavering determination and a lifelong affinity for the smell of salt water, a constant reminder of his defining personal trials. Born into a prominent political family in Brookline, Massachusetts in 1917, Kennedy's path to the presidency was initially overshadowed by his older brother, Joseph Jr. However, it was his service during World War II that dramatically altered his trajectory and forged his personal legend. As commander of Patrol Torpedo PT Boat 109 in the Pacific Theater, Kennedy experienced firsthand the brutality of war. In August 1943, his boat was rammed and sunk by a Japanese destroyer. Despite severe back injuries, he heroically led his surviving crew members through perilous waters, swimming for miles while towing an injured man, until they reached a remote island. 10 days later, they were rescued. This act of bravery, widely publicized, cemented his image as a war hero and a man of extraordinary courage. This fighter's spirit was not merely a convenient public image, it was a fundamental aspect of his character. Biographer Robert Dallek, in An Unfinished Life, John F. Kennedy, 1917 Nuat 1963, highlights how Kennedy consistently pushed his physical limits, battling chronic pain and numerous health issues throughout his life, yet presenting an image of vigor and strength. His love for sailing and the sea was more than a pastime. It was a continuation of this spirit, a domain where he could confront and master the elements. Imagine him, far from the polished halls of Congress, navigating turbulent waters, the salty spray a familiar balm to his complex inner world. This personal history of resilience and heroism profoundly shaped his leadership style, imbuing his calls to public service and his resolve during crises like the Cuban Missile Crisis with genuine weight. It was this ingrained fighter spirit, honed by real-world adversity and forever linked to the vast expanse of the ocean, that propelled him to the nation's highest office and defined his tragically short but impactful presidency. John F. Kennedy's presidency, inaugurated in the midst of the Cold War, was characterized by a distinct Rough Riders charge, a call to arms for a new generation of Americans, and a readiness to confront global challenges head-on. This spirit was not merely a political posture. It was an extension of his personal ethos, forged through real-life encounters with danger and a deep-seated belief in proactive, decisive action. The heat of battle, both literal and metaphorical, was a familiar terrain for Kennedy. His military heroism during World War II, particularly the PT-109 incident, was expertly woven into his political narrative. The image of the young, fearless naval officer defying death became a powerful symbol. During his presidential campaign, this narrative was used to contrast with his political opponents, presenting him as a dynamic leader prepared for difficult decisions. Public opinion, documented by pollsters like George Gallup, revealed a significant portion of the electorate was swayed by Kennedy's wartime service, viewing it as concrete proof of his leadership capabilities. Once in office, this combat-tested resolve translated into a foreign policy characterized by assertive engagement. The Cuban Missile Crisis in October 1962 remains the paramount example. Confronted with Soviet nuclear missiles in Cuba, just 90 miles from US shores, Kennedy refused to back down. Instead of immediate military intervention, which some advisors advocated, he opted for a naval blockade, which he termed a quarantine, around Cuba, demanding the removal of the missiles. This incredibly tense 13-day standoff brought the world to the brink of nuclear war. Historians like Graham T. Allison, in Essence of Decision, meticulously analyze Kennedy's calm, measured, yet unyielding leadership during this crisis, demonstrating his ability to navigate immense pressure and choose a path of calculated risk. Furthermore, his establishment of the Peace Corps in 1961, a program sending young American volunteers to assist developing nations, embodied a different kind of call to arms, a commitment to altruistic service and the global spread of democratic ideals. It reflected his belief that America should not just defend itself, but actively shape a better world. Even his famous challenge to ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country, resonated with a generation ready for collective action. This was the Rough Rider's charge for the nuclear age, a president who, having faced death and danger, understood the stakes and bravely called his nation to meet them, embracing the heat of battle in all its forms. In the chaotic political landscape of the late 20th century, a figure emerged whose path to the presidency was as unconventional as his personal passions. Ronald Reagan, the 40th President of the United States, was not primarily a politician, but an actor, a storyteller, and a man with a deeply ingrained artist soul. This unique background, far from the traditional legal or military routes to power, profoundly influenced his approach to leadership, transforming the presidency into a canvas upon which he painted a vision of America. Born in Tampico, Illinois, in 1911, Reagan's early career was in radio broadcasting, an experience that honed his already considerable communication skills. He then transitioned to Hollywood, starring in over 50 films during the golden age of cinema. This extensive experience as an actor instilled in him an innate understanding of narrative, character, and the power of emotional connection. Historians often point to his carefully crafted public appearances, his eloquent speeches, and his ability to convey complex ideas through simple, relatable anecdotes as direct consequences of his acting career. Biographer Lou Cannon, in President Reagan, The Role of a Lifetime, emphasizes how Reagan viewed the presidency as a unique performance, one in which he was responsible for both script and delivery. Reagan's eccentricity was not in bizarre personal habits, but in his professional origin and the way he applied its lessons to the highest office. He understood that leadership, particularly in the modern media age, was as much about storytelling and persuasion as it was about policy. His Morning in America campaign advertisements, for instance, were carefully crafted narratives of national renewal, evoking optimism and patriotism in a way that resonated deeply with a public yearning for positive change after years of economic stagnation and national self-doubt. He used humor, often self-deprecating, to disarm critics and connect with ordinary Americans. This approach allowed him to paint a compelling vision of a strong, prosperous America. Imagine a president who, instead of focusing solely on legislative minutiae, saw his primary role as inspiring a nation, directing, as it were, a colossal national production. This artist soul allowed him to elevate the office beyond mere administration, transforming the canvas of leadership into a compelling and often poetic saga of American resilience and aspiration. His tenure fundamentally altered how Americans perceived presidential leadership, blending traditional politics with the captivating power of dramatic performance. Ronald Reagan's unique approach to the presidency, deeply informed by his acting career, often blurred the lines between performance and governance, creating a dynamic where the paintbrush and policy became inextricably linked. His ability to articulate a clear, optimistic vision for America, often leveraging his communication skills and personal charisma, constituted a powerful stroke of genius. Yet, this very strength also led to a vision's blur, where the compelling narrative sometimes overshadowed the granular details of policy or the complexities of implementation. Key to Reagan's success was his unwavering belief in the power of ideas and his ability to distill complex issues into clear, easily digestible messages. His economic program, Reaganomics, based on supply-side economics, involved significant tax cuts, deregulation, and reduced government spending. While economists debated its long-term effects, Reagan presented it to the public not as a dry set of fiscal policies, but as a path to renewed prosperity and individual freedom. He used carefully chosen anecdotes and powerful imagery, often referencing the American pioneering spirit and entrepreneurial drive to sell his vision. Historian David Gergen, a communications director for Reagan, frequently notes how much effort was put into crafting presidential remarks, ensuring they resonated emotionally and intellectually with the public. However, this focus on the grand narrative sometimes led to a perceived lack of attention to operational specifics, a kind of vision's blur. Critics often pointed to policies where the ideal outcome, as painted by Reagan, diverged significantly from the practical realities or had unintended consequences. For example, while advocating for a strong national defense and challenging the Soviet Union, the actual management and ethical conduct within his administration, particularly during the Iran-Contra affair, raised serious questions about oversight. Imagine Reagan, the visionary, delivering a powerful speech about American strength, while in the background, a covert and potentially illegal arms for hostages deal was unfolding. This dichotomy, the inspiring rhetoric versus the sometimes messy reality, was a central tension of his presidency. Despite potential criticisms regarding execution, Reagan's stroke of genius lay in his capacity to restore national confidence and redefine America's global posture. His unwavering anti-communism and pursuit of peace through strength ultimately played a significant role in accelerating the end of the Cold War. He demonstrated that leadership was not just about commanding armies or drafting legislation, but about inspiring a nation, about painting a compelling future with words and urging people to believe in its realization. This blend of artistry and statesmanship, his unique eccentricity, left an indelible mark on the American presidency, fundamentally reshaping political communication and the very perception of executive power. In the late 20th century, as the world moved into an increasingly interconnected and complex geopolitical landscape, a new kind of American leader emerged, embodying a spirit deeply rooted in a distinctly American archetype. George W. Bush, the 43rd President of the United States, projected an image of down-to-earth authenticity, often leveraging his Texas roots and a folksy demeanor. This was not a carefully cultivated performance in the mold of his predecessor, Ronald Reagan, but rather an intrinsic part of his personality, often characterized as the cowboy's ride, an unvarnished approach to leadership that sought to navigate the open range of power with directness and unwavering conviction. Born in New Haven, Connecticut in 1946, but raised in Midland and Houston, Texas, Bush's identity was strongly tied to the American Southwest. His early career included working in the oil industry, owning the Texas Rangers baseball team, and serving as governor of Texas. These experiences, far removed from the Washington, D.C. establishment, instilled in him a pragmatic, results-oriented mindset and a preference for clear, decisive action over nuanced policy debates. Biographer Elizabeth Mitchell, in W, An American Profile, highlights his casual speaking style, his use of nicknames, and his often irreverent humor, all contributing to an image that resonated with many Americans seeking a leader they perceived as genuine and approachable. Bush's eccentricity was in this deliberate eschewal of intellectual pretensions. Unlike many of his predecessors who boasted Ivy League law degrees or distinguished academic careers, Bush often prioritized instinct and conviction. His leadership style, particularly after the seismic events of September 11, 2001, became profoundly shaped by a sense of moral clarity and a belief in assertive American exceptionalism. He articulated a foreign policy doctrine that emphasized preemptive action and nation-building, a bold departure from isolationist tendencies. Imagine a president who, instead of poring over detailed memos, preferred direct, succinct briefings and face-to-face interactions, trusting his gut as much as, if not more than, expert analysis. This cowboy's ride was not about recklessness, but about a perceived straightforwardness and a willingness to confront challenges head-on, even if it meant venturing into unfamiliar and potentially dangerous territory on the open range of global power. His leadership, defined by a distinct blend of Texas charm and resolute action, offered a unique and often polarizing chapter in the American presidency. George W. Bush's presidency, particularly in the aftermath of September 11, 2001, became defined by a steadfast rancher's resolve, an unyielding determination, and a direct, often blunt approach to global challenges. This grit, deeply rooted in his Texas upbringing and a no-nonsense worldview, was brought to bear against the chilling complexities of geopolitics, reshaping American foreign policy and leaving an indelible mark on the 21st century. Following the devastating terrorist attacks, Bush's initial response was marked by a powerful blend of grief, anger, and resolve. He famously declared a war on terror, a global campaign against Al-Qaeda and other extremist organizations. This was not a traditional war against a nation-state, but a diffuse ideological conflict that demanded a new strategic framework. His foreign policy doctrine, often termed the Bush Doctrine, emphasized unilateral action when necessary, preemptive strikes against perceived threats, and the promotion of democracy abroad. As political scientist Stephen S. Smith notes, this was a significant departure from the post-Cold War consensus, reflecting a profound shift in American self-perception and global engagement. The invasion of Afghanistan in October 2001 to dismantle Al-Qaeda and depose the Taliban regime was a direct application of this resolve. Later, the 2003 invasion of Iraq, based on intelligence reports subsequently found to be flawed, suggesting Saddam Hussein possessed weapons of mass destruction and connections to terrorism, demonstrated Bush's willingness to commit American resources to a long-term, transformative endeavor. Imagine the weight of intelligence briefings, the moral gravity of authorizing military force, combined with a president who projected an image of unwavering conviction. This rancher's resolve was a constant throughout these decisions, whether praised as decisive leadership or criticized as stubborn inflexibility. He often framed these interventions in moral terms, describing the fight against terrorism as a clash between good and evil, a simplification that resonated with some and alarmed others. This distinctly American approach, born from the ranching ethos of self-reliance and direct confrontation, was met with both fervent support and fierce opposition, yet it irrevocably altered the geopolitical landscape, demonstrating how deeply personal character can influence national and international policy when faced with the chill of modern global threats. In the early 21st century, as the United States grappled with the aftermath of geopolitical upheaval and domestic economic challenges, a leader emerged with a distinct, almost academic, approach to global engagement. Barack Obama, the 44th President of the United States, brought to the Oval Office a nuanced worldview, a measured temperament, and a profound belief in the power of dialogue. His was the navigator's chart, a methodical, sometimes cautious strategy to steer the nation through the uncharted waters of diplomacy, favoring multilateral cooperation and strategic patience over unilateral action. Born in Honolulu, Hawaii in 1961, Obama's multicultural background and extensive education, culminating in a Juris Doctor from Harvard Law School, provided a foundation for his intellectual and deliberative style. His early career as a community organizer, a civil rights attorney, and a constitutional law professor shaped his understanding of complex systemic issues and the importance of consensus building. Historian Gary Young, in The Speech, The Story Behind Obama's Dream and a Nation's New Beginning, highlights his remarkable calm under pressure and his ability to articulate intricate arguments with clarity and composure. This was a leader who processed information thoroughly, weighed options meticulously, and typically spoke without relying on bluster or impulsive declarations. Obama's eccentricity was not found in overt personal quirks, but in his disciplined intellectualism and his almost clinical detachment from the often emotional rhetoric of political discourse. He sought to re-engage with the world not through force alone, but through sophisticated diplomatic efforts. This philosophy was evident in his outreach to Cuba, culminating in the restoration of diplomatic relations in 2015 after more than half a century. It was further exemplified by the painstaking multilateral negotiations that led to the Iran nuclear deal in 2015, an agreement aimed at preventing Iran from developing nuclear weapons in exchange for sanctions relief. Imagine a president who viewed international relations like a complex chess game, carefully plotting moves and counter-moves on a global scale, prioritizing long-term strategic outcomes over immediate, potentially volatile reactions. His emphasis on diplomacy, even with adversaries, marked a significant departure from the more confrontational approaches of his predecessors, charting a deliberate course through the turbulent, uncharted waters of 21st century international relations. This intellectual patience and a preference for strategic navigation defined his unique approach to executive power. Barack Obama's presidency, characterized by his cerebral approach to policy and diplomacy, also harbored a unique strain of starry-eyed ambition, a profound belief in the power of audacious goals and the transformative potential of American leadership. This was vividly illustrated by his commitment to space exploration and scientific endeavor, hearkening back to a grander vision for humanity's future. Yet, this cosmic dream often faced the harsh glare of fiscal austerity, partisan gridlock, and the sobering realities of geopolitics. In 2010, Obama outlined an ambitious new vision for NASA, redirecting its focus from a return to the moon to a future manned mission to an asteroid by 2025, and then to Mars in the 2030s. This Journey to Mars initiative, while rooted in scientific exploration and engineering prowess, also served a broader purpose: to inspire a new generation, foster international collaboration, and drive technological innovation. He believed in the inherent human drive to explore and the strategic advantages that leadership in space could provide. As detailed in accounts from his science advisor, John Holdren, Obama viewed investment in science and technology not merely as an economic driver, but as a foundational element of national identity and global influence. However, this ambitious vision often contended with the glare of reality. The costs associated with such grand projects, coupled with a national budget constrained by economic recovery and ongoing military engagements, led to significant challenges in funding and political support. NASA's budget, while substantial, faced constant pressure, and the timelines for manned missions were frequently adjusted. Imagine the president addressing scientists and engineers, speaking of humanity's destiny among the stars, while simultaneously grappling with congressional appropriations committees debating budget cuts for essential social programs. This tension between aspirational goals and practical limitations created a recurring theme throughout his tenure. Furthermore, his efforts to combat climate change, another ambitious global project, faced similar headwinds. He championed the Paris Agreement in 2015, a landmark international accord to limit global warming, demonstrating his commitment to a shared planetary future. This was a cosmic dream of global cooperation on an existential threat. Yet, even this achievement faced domestic political opposition, and the subsequent withdrawal by the succeeding administration underscored the fragility of even widely supported international initiatives. Obama's starry-eyed ambition was a defining characteristic, an eccentricity of optimism that aimed to push the boundaries of human achievement and cooperation. It revealed a leader deeply invested in the long arc of progress, even as he navigated the immediate, often frustrating glare of earthbound political and economic realities. Following an era defined by grand ambition and global navigation, the American political landscape once again shifted, bringing a figure whose eccentricity was not a personal quirk or a grand vision, but rather a profound embodiment of institutional memory and historical continuity. George H.W. Bush, the 41st President of the United States, was the quintessential elder statesman, a man whose career spanned decades of public service across multiple high-level positions. His quiet dignity, even-keeled temperament, and deep reverence for precedent and established institutions meant his leadership was imbued with the weight of memory, a pragmatic, often cautious approach informed by years of observing, learning, and participating in the machinery of government. Born in Milton, Massachusetts in 1924, Bush's early life was marked by service in World War II as a naval aviator, flying 58 combat missions and surviving being shot down in the Pacific. This experience, along with his subsequent Yale education, laid the foundation for a life dedicated to public service. His resume was unparalleled. Congressman from Texas, Ambassador to the United Nations, Chairman of the Republican National Committee, Chief of the U.S. Liaison Office in China, Director of Central Intelligence, and Vice President for 8 years under Ronald Reagan. This extensive background provided him with an encyclopedic understanding of global affairs, domestic policy, and the inner workings of bureaucracy. As biographer John Meacham details in Destiny and Power, the American Odyssey of George Herbert Walker Bush, he was a practitioner of retail politics, valuing personal relationships and consensus building above fiery rhetoric. Bush's eccentricity was his almost old-fashioned adherence to traditional diplomatic protocols and bipartisan cooperation in an increasingly polarized political environment. He was often perceived as a patrician figure, a stark contrast to the more populist figures who both preceded and followed him. He prioritized stability and incremental progress over dramatic shifts. His leadership during the dissolution of the Soviet Union and the reunification of Germany showcased this careful, nuanced approach. He navigated these seismic geopolitical events with caution, engaging allies and adversaries alike, ensuring a peaceful transition rather than seeking a triumphalist victory. Imagine a president who, rather than seeking headlines, meticulously worked the phones, built coalitions, and quietly nurtured long-standing relationships to achieve foreign policy objectives. This elder statesman quality, coupled with the immense weight of memory gleaned from decades at the highest echelons of power, made his presidency a testament to the enduring value of experience and tempered judgment amidst tumultuous global change. George H.W. Bush, the consummate public servant, approached the presidency with the meticulous precision of an architect's blueprint. His goal was not to dismantle the existing structure of government or foreign policy, but to refine and strengthen it, leaving behind a carefully planned legacy. Yet, despite his careful planning and numerous successes, his tenure is also shadowed by the unfinished design, a series of aspirations left incomplete, and a historical judgment often grappling with what might have been. One of the most defining aspects of Bush's single presidential term was his masterful handling of foreign policy during a period of unprecedented global change. He oversaw the peaceful end of the Cold War and the collapse of the Soviet Union, skillfully navigating the reunification of Germany and managing the instability in Eastern Europe. His leadership in forming a broad international coalition to repel Iraq's invasion of Kuwait in 1990-1991, culminating in Operation Desert Storm, stands as a military and diplomatic triumph. This was a direct result of his lifetime of experience and meticulous preparation, laying the groundwork through phone calls, summits, and personal diplomacy. Historians like Randall Woods highlight how Bush's personal relationships with leaders like Mikhail Gorbachev and Helmut Kohl were instrumental in these complex negotiations. However, despite these foreign policy victories, Bush's domestic agenda faced significant challenges and ultimately contributed to his electoral defeat in 1992. His promise of a kinder, gentler nation and his declared ambition to be the education president were outlined in his blueprint, but many felt these initiatives remained an unfinished design. The lingering economic recession of the early 1990s, juxtaposed with the perception that he was more focused on international affairs, created a disconnect with the American electorate. His famous "Read My Lips, No New Taxes" pledge, broken in a necessary budget compromise to address the national debt, further eroded public trust. Imagine the meticulous architect having completed a magnificent wing of a building, foreign policy, struggling to complete the domestic interior with the same success. This dichotomy underscores the unique challenges of the presidency, where even the most experienced and dedicated leader can find their comprehensive blueprint thwarted by unforeseen circumstances and shifting public priorities. Bush's legacy is thus a complex tapestry of bold achievement and unfulfilled promise, a testament to the fact that even the most carefully drawn plans can be altered by the unpredictable forces of history. In the tumultuous era of the late 20th century, a figure emerged from the heart of American politics whose persona was as complex and multifaceted as the challenges he faced. Bill Clinton, the 42nd President of the United States, possessed an enigmatic smile, a blend of genuine charm, keen intellect, and an almost preternatural ability to connect with people from all walks of life. This smile, however, often coexisted with, and at times fueled, a persistent whisper of conspiracy, making his presidency a constant balancing act between charisma and controversy. Born in Hope, Arkansas, in 1946, Clinton's early life was marked by both hardship and exceptional academic achievement, including a Rhodes Scholarship to Oxford University and a law degree from Yale. His political career, first as Arkansas Attorney General and then as a 5-term governor of Arkansas, provided him with extensive executive experience. He was a master of retail politics, famously capable of making everyone he met feel like the most important person in the room. This charisma, coupled with his deep understanding of policy, made him a formidable political force. Political scientist Stephen E. Wayne, in The Road to the White House 2020, highlights Clinton's extraordinary communication skills, his ability to convey empathy, and his capacity to adapt his message to diverse audiences. These traits were instrumental in his 1992 victory, ending a 12-year Republican hold on the presidency. However, almost from the moment he entered the national stage, his career was shadowed by various allegations and investigations. The Whitewater controversy, originating from a failed real estate investment from the 1970s, became a relentless media and political narrative throughout his 2 terms. While no criminal charges were ever brought against the Clintons directly in relation to Whitewater, the investigations spurred renewed scrutiny into other aspects of their lives. These whispers of conspiracy, often amplified by political adversaries, created an atmosphere of distrust and distraction. Imagine a president, renowned for his ability to connect directly with the American public, simultaneously battling multiple independent councils and congressional committees, each investigating some aspect of his past or administration. His enigmatic smile could be interpreted in myriad ways, as disarming charm, or by his critics, as a mask for evasiveness. This duality, immense public appeal juxtaposed with persistent allegations, ultimately defined a presidency where charisma battled controversy, and the whisper of conspiracy often threatened to drown out the roar of policy achievement. The presidency of Bill Clinton, while marked by economic prosperity and significant policy initiatives, was also deeply intertwined with a pervasive sense of vulnerability, a narrative continually shaped by shadows of power and the growing influence of paranoia's grip. This atmosphere, fueled by both political opposition and genuine instances of personal misconduct, created a constant legal and public relations battle that, at times, eclipsed his legislative achievements. The presidency itself became a stage for a drama where the glare of truth was often subjective and hotly contested. The most prominent example of this was the sexual harassment lawsuit filed by Paula Jones and the subsequent independent counsel investigation led by Kenneth Starr. This inquiry, initially focused on the Whitewater scandal, expanded into an investigation of President Clinton's conduct regarding the Jones lawsuit, specifically allegations of perjury and obstruction of justice related to his relationship with White House intern Monica Lewinsky. The Starr report, released in September 1998, detailed 11 grounds for impeachment, leading to the impeachment of President Clinton by the House of Representatives in December 1998 on charges of perjury and obstruction of justice. He was subsequently acquitted by the Senate in February 1999. This period was characterized by an unprecedented level of public and legal scrutiny into a president's private life. Every detail, however intimate, was subjected to intense examination, fueling a sense of siege within the White House and among his supporters. Historian Richard Posner's An Affair of State, The Investigation, Impeachment, and Trial of President Clinton, offers a detailed account of the legal and political complexities of this historic impeachment. Imagine the constant spectre of subpoenas, grand juries, and intense media dissection, not just of policy decisions, but of personal relationships. This created an environment where the lines between political opposition and perceived personal vendetta blurred, fostering a paranoia's grip within the administration. Clinton himself often spoke of a vast right-wing conspiracy working against him. Despite this intense scrutiny, Clinton's approval ratings remained remarkably high throughout much of the impeachment process, suggesting a disconnect between public opinion and the actions of his political opponents. This period underscores America's fascination with its leaders and the increasingly blurred lines between public service and personal conduct. While the economy boomed and welfare reform was passed, the daily grind of fending off relentless investigations cast a long shadow. Ultimately, his presidency stands as a complex study in the resilience of a leader facing intense personal and political challenges, where the glare of truth, filtered through partisan lenses, proved to be both illuminating and, at times, blinding. As the 21st century dawned, and the nation navigated the complexities of a changing global order and domestic polarization, a distinct kind of leadership emerged, characterized by an intentional display of perceived ordinariness. Joseph R. Biden Jr., the 46th President of the United States, cultivated an image built on the everyman's touch, a deliberate projection of familiarity, empathy, and a deep connection to working-class roots. This eccentricity, in an era often dominated by charismatic figures or highly intellectualized approaches, offered a comfort of familiarity amidst a sometimes turbulent political landscape. Born in Scranton, Pennsylvania in 1942, Biden's early life and political career were firmly rooted in the working-class communities of the Northeast. His long tenure in the Senate, representing Delaware for 36 years, and his 8 years as vice president under Barack Obama, imbued him with an intimate knowledge of policymaking and legislative processes. Yet, throughout his decades in public service, he consistently maintained an image of approachability and relatability, often seen engaging in casual conversation, sharing personal anecdotes, and speaking in direct, unvarnished terms. Biographer Evan Osnos, in Joe Biden, The Life, the Run, and What Comes Next, details Biden's extensive use of personal stories to connect with audiences, a tactic honed over years of campaigning and public speaking. Biden's eccentricity lies not in grand pronouncements or a radical vision, but in his steadfast commitment to a familiar, almost traditional style of politics. In an age of social media, instantaneous communication, and often performative leadership, Biden often leaned into a more old-fashioned face-to-face approach, emphasizing shared values and common ground. His often repeated phrases, like "folks" and "here's the deal," became part of his lexicon, reinforcing his image as a man of the people rather than an aloof intellectual or a removed elite. Imagine a president who, despite holding the world's most powerful office, frequently invoked his middle-class upbringing, his family's struggles, and his journey on Amtrak commuter trains, a conscious effort to bridge the perceived gap between Washington, D.C. and Main Street America. This everyman's touch provided a peculiar comfort of familiarity, a reassuring presence that promised empathy and a return to perceived political norms. Even as the nation wrestled with unprecedented challenges, his approach, built on a foundation of relatability and personal connection, offered a unique blend of perceived ordinariness and experienced leadership, standing apart from many of his more outwardly flamboyant or intensely intellectual predecessors. Joseph R. Biden Jr.'s political persona often presented as embodying the farmer's hand, a symbol of hard work, simple truths, and unwavering resolve, has been a cornerstone of his public appeal. This image, cultivated over a half-century in public service, suggests a leader grounded in fundamental American values, offering a return to traditional politics and clear-eyed common sense. Yet, even this carefully constructed narrative, like those of many before him, has found itself grappling with the stain of scandal, highlighting the persistent challenges to credibility and trust that impact American political figures, regardless of their cultivated image. Biden's career is marked by a consistent effort to project an image of honesty and authenticity. His frequent reminiscing about his upbringing in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and Newcastle County, Delaware, and his emphasis on family values and service have become defining characteristics. He often frames policy debates in terms of their direct impact on working families, using accessible language that appeals to a broad demographic. This approach to articulating simple truths is a deliberate rhetorical strategy designed to foster trust and bypass the more abstract or ideological arguments that often dominate political discourse. As political media analyses often point out, Biden's reliance on personal narrative and direct appeals to shared American experiences is a core component of his communication strategy. However, despite this effort to maintain an unblemished farmer's hand image, Biden's long career has not been immune to controversy and the stain of scandal. While not on the scale of some of his predecessors, instances of ethical questions and allegations have periodically surfaced. For example, during his first presidential campaign in 1987, he was forced to withdraw after revelations that he had plagiarized parts of a speech from British Labour Party leader Neil Kinnock and had misrepresented his academic record. Later, questions regarding the business dealings of his son, Hunter Biden, specifically concerning his role on the board of Burisma Holdings in Ukraine, while Joe Biden was vice president, became a significant political attack point, leading to congressional investigations and intense media scrutiny. These events, regardless of their legal outcomes, cast shadows on the carefully maintained image of integrity. Imagine a leader who prides himself on his straightforwardness and honesty, constantly having to defend against criticisms that challenge the very foundation of his public persona. This tension between the simple truths he aims to convey and the complex, often messy, realities of political life, marked by external scrutiny and the actions of those around him, creates a unique dynamic. It demonstrates that even a president who epitomizes an everyman's familiar touch cannot entirely escape the relentless glare of public and media scrutiny, where even the slightest misstep or allegation can leave a persistent stain on a carefully cultivated legacy. In the tumultuous currents of 21st century American politics, a figure emerged whose presidency was less an evolution of existing norms and more a seismic rupture. Donald J. Trump, the 45th President of the United States, came to power not through traditional political channels, but on the strength of a visionary's gaze that promised to upend the establishment and fundamentally reshape America, igniting a spark of revolution that resonated deeply with a segment of the electorate yearning for radical change. Born in Queens, New York, in 1946, Trump's pre-presidential career was marked by his highly publicized ventures in real estate development, casinos, and later, reality television. His celebrity persona, built on a brand of brash confidence, direct communication, and a willingness to challenge conventional wisdom, was unlike that of any previous political figure. This background, devoid of traditional political or military service, made him an outsider, an unconventional candidate who often spoke directly to the public through rallies and social media, circumventing established media outlets. Political scientist Stephen Skowronek, in Presidential Leadership in Political Time, might categorize Trump as a disjunctive president, one who presides over an era where the prevailing political order is breaking down, and whose very presence heralds a period of profound restructuring. Trump's eccentricity was rooted in his deliberate rejection of political correctness, his use of hyperbole, and his aggressive, often confrontational communication style. He tapped into a deep vein of frustration and disillusionment among voters who felt ignored by mainstream politicians. His campaign slogan, "Make America Great Again," was more than a slogan. It was a rallying cry, a promise of a return to a perceived golden age, and an implicitly revolutionary rejection of the status quo. Imagine a politician dismissing expert consensus, attacking established institutions, and speaking in a language that eschewed diplomatic niceties, all while maintaining fervent support from his base. This visionary's gaze was not about incremental policy shifts, but about a wholesale reimagining of America's place in the world and its domestic governance. It was a spark that ignited a powerful, sometimes volatile populist revolution, overturning traditional expectations of presidential demeanor and behavior, and fundamentally altering the discourse of American politics. He approached the presidency not as a custodian of established order, but as a disruptor, an agent of radical change in both style and substance. Donald Trump's presidency, inaugurated on a wave of populist fervor, was driven by a powerful dreamer's burden, a fervent belief in an idealized, often nostalgic vision of America, and a relentless pursuit of that vision with an almost evangelistic zeal. This idealism's heat, born from a desire to address the perceived grievances of a forgotten working class, often collided with the chill of disillusionment, as the complexities of governance and the entrenched nature of political institutions posed formidable obstacles to his revolutionary agenda. Central to Trump's idealism was his promise to make America great again, a multifaceted agenda aimed at revitalizing domestic manufacturing, renegotiating perceived unfair trade deals, and asserting American strength on the global stage. His policies, such as the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017, aimed to stimulate economic growth through deregulation and lower corporate taxes. His withdrawal from the Trans-Pacific Partnership and the Paris Agreement, and his imposition of tariffs on goods from countries like China, signaled a dramatic shift away from decades of globalist policy towards a more protectionist and nationalist stance. Political scientists like Ronald Inglehart and Pippa Norris have described the populist surge that propelled Trump into office as a reaction against cultural and economic globalization, reflecting a deep-seated desire for a return to national sovereignty and identity. However, this ambitious idealism frequently encountered the chill of disillusionment. Many of his signature policy promises, such as constructing a wall along the entire US-Mexico border, paid for by Mexico, faced significant legal, logistical, and political resistance. His efforts to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act, despite repeated attempts, ultimately failed to pass Congress. Even successful policy changes sometimes created unintended consequences or exacerbated societal divisions, leaving many of his supporters feeling that the promised revolution was incomplete or had not fully materialized. Imagine a president constantly advocating for radical change, yet facing daily battles against entrenched bureaucracy, a hostile media, and a deeply divided Congress, all while navigating the immense responsibilities of the office. This constant push and pull between his idealism's heat and the unyielding realities of the political system created a sense of ongoing friction. The dreamer's burden of his presidency was not simply to enact policy, but to fundamentally alter the national trajectory, a task that often proved more challenging than his rhetoric suggested, leaving both his ardent supporters and his fiercest critics grappling with a profound sense of either hope deferred or a dangerous vision averted. This tension defines much of his unique and controversial legacy. In the shifting sands of 21st century American politics, a figure emerged whose path to the highest office was unprecedented, embodying an outsider's perspective that fundamentally challenged established norms and delivered a shock of the new to the political system. Donald J. Trump, the 45th President of the United States, was a self-proclaimed and genuine non-politician in a realm traditionally dominated by career public servants. His background in real estate and entertainment, rather than traditional government or military service, provided him with a unique lens through which to view governance and a communication style that frequently eschewed diplomatic niceties in favor of direct, often unfiltered address. Born and primarily raised in Queens, New York in 1946, Trump's ascent to the presidency was the culmination of decades spent cultivating a public persona as a successful businessman and media personality. His reality television show, The Apprentice, cemented his image as a decisive, no-nonsense leader. This celebrity status allowed him to bypass many traditional gatekeepers of political power, relying instead on direct appeals to the electorate through rallies and, crucially, social media. As a 2016 study by the Pew Research Center illustrated, a significant portion of his supporters engaged with his message directly through platforms like Twitter, where he could communicate unfiltered, creating an immediate and intimate connection that bypassed traditional news filters. Trump's eccentricity was not merely his non-traditional background. It was his deliberate and consistent refusal to conform to presidential decorum or conventional political strategies. He approached the presidency as an extension of his business empire, prioritizing transactional outcomes and often employing adversarial tactics with both domestic and international actors. His frequent use of hyperbole, nicknames for opponents, and informal language in official settings represented a radical departure from the carefully scripted communication styles of previous administrations. Imagine a president who viewed long-standing international alliances not as sacrosanct pillars of global stability, but as business deals ripe for renegotiation, or who treated press conferences more like political rallies than traditional exchanges of information. This outsider's perspective generated a profound shock of the new, upending established political playbooks and redefining the boundaries of presidential communication and conduct. It forced both his allies and adversaries to adapt to a leader performing a role dramatically different from any who had come before, creating a presidency that was undeniably distinct and profoundly disruptive. Donald Trump's presidency was not merely a departure from traditional political style. It was a deliberate and consistent assault on established norms, ushering in an era of shattered norms. His approach to governance and communication frequently crossed what were previously considered political taboos, generating a continuous tremor of transformation that fundamentally altered the relationship between the executive branch, the media, and the public. One of the most striking examples of this norm-shattering was his unprecedented use of social media, particularly Twitter. Unlike previous presidents who used official channels for statements, Trump frequently communicated policy, responded to critics, and even fired officials through a torrent of individual tweets, often at irregular hours. This direct, unmediated communication bypassed traditional media filters and official communication protocols, and as documented by the National Archives and Records Administration, directly impacted the permanence and preservation of presidential records. This constant, direct engagement, often laced with blunt criticism and personal attacks, shattered long-held conventions of presidential decorum and diplomatic language. Furthermore, his rhetoric and actions often challenged the perceived independence of government institutions. His frequent criticism of the Justice Department, the FBI, and the intelligence agencies, often delivered in public forums, represented a significant undermining of the traditional separation of powers and the professional independence of these bodies. His public questioning of electoral integrity, particularly concerning the 2020 presidential election results, represented a profound breach of democratic custom and peaceful transfer of power. Political scientists, such as George M. Thomas, in The Political Philosophy of Donald Trump, have examined how Trump's rhetoric redefines what constitutes legitimate political discourse, pushing boundaries that were once considered sacrosanct. Imagine a president who, instead of carefully constructing bipartisan consensus, actively sought to mobilize his base through rhetorical combat, openly expressed disdain for political opponents, and dismissed critical news reports as fake news. This approach generated a constant state of political tension and perpetual campaigning, even within the presidency itself. The shattered norms extended to international relations, with Trump frequently challenging long-standing alliances and engaging in highly personalized diplomacy with autocratic leaders. This presidency, therefore, became a powerful case study in how a leader can intentionally break taboos, creating a sustained tremor of transformation in the American political landscape. The extent of this transformation, and whether these shattered norms will be reassembled or permanently altered, remains a critical question for the future of democratic governance. The modern American presidency, in its complex and demanding essence, often calls for a leader whose intellect and decision-making processes are both robust and adaptable. Yet, some presidents exhibit an unconventional mind, a cognitive approach that deviates significantly from established norms, leading to unique outcomes. This eccentricity can result in groundbreaking decisions, but also in a cacophony of counsel, where traditional advisory structures struggle to adapt to an idiosyncratic leader. Consider the example of Abraham Lincoln, a self-taught lawyer whose intellectual development was largely outside formal institutions. His decision-making during the Civil War, particularly regarding the Emancipation Proclamation, was often characterized by a profound, almost solitary moral reasoning, combined with shrewd political calculations. While he valued his cabinet, he frequently deliberated alone, wrestling with complex questions in a manner some contemporaries found baffling. Historian Doris Kearns Goodwin, in Team of Rivals, illustrates how Lincoln carefully managed a cabinet of strong personalities, many of whom initially saw themselves as his superiors, often allowing differing viewpoints to clash before making a final, often unexpected decision. This process, while effective, cultivated a cacophony of counsel that he deftly orchestrated. Another president whose unconventional mind shaped his approach to counsel was Andrew Jackson. Known for his fierce independence and reliance on a close circle of informal advisors dubbed the kitchen cabinet, Jackson often bypassed his official cabinet secretaries, leading to friction and distrust within his administration. This deviation from traditional protocols was an eccentricity born of his populist conviction and deep distrust of established elites. He preferred to consult with individuals he trusted implicitly, often outside official channels, a practice that generated significant political controversy but allowed him to pursue his agenda with unyielding determination. Biographer H.W. Brands frequently highlights Jackson's reliance on instinct and personal loyalty over formal bureaucratic advice. These instances reveal that while presidents are constantly surrounded by experts and advisors, the degree to which they assimilate, synthesize, or disregard that counsel is often tied to their unique cognitive and decision-making styles. An unconventional mind at the helm, while potentially leading to visionary leadership, inevitably creates a cacophony of counsel, a challenge for those accustomed to more structured advisory roles and a fascinating aspect of the eccentricity of power. This dynamic shapes not only the executive branch, but also the broader relationship between the president and the entire apparatus of government, highlighting how personal temperament intertwines with institutional function. The United States presidency, by its very nature, often attracts individuals who possess a strong sense of self and an unyielding commitment to their convictions. When this individuality combusts with the immense power of the office, it can ignite a maverick's mandate, a presidency defined by a leader's singular will, often challenging established political traditions. This individuality's fire, while potentially revolutionary, inevitably grapples with the enormous weight of history and the constraints of the democratic system. Take, for instance, Andrew Jackson, whose presidency from 1829 to 1837 epitomized the maverick spirit. A military hero and populist tribune, Jackson saw himself as the direct representative of the common man, empowered by a direct mandate from the people rather than filtered through political elites. This belief led him to confront powerful institutions, most notably the Second Bank of the United States. Despite the concerns of his cabinet and financial advisors, Jackson viewed the bank as an undemocratic concentration of wealth and power, a threat to Republican liberties. His defiant veto of its recharter bill in 1832, a document penned with a strong populist tone, ignited a fierce political battle. As historian Robert Five Remini documents in his multi-volume biography of Jackson, this refusal to compromise, even when faced with overwhelming opposition from Congress and the financial establishment, was a hallmark of personal conviction driving presidential policy. Another example can be found in Theodore Roosevelt. Having ascended to the presidency after McKinley's assassination in 1901, Roosevelt possessed a rare combination of intellectual prowess and physical vigor. He expanded the scope of executive power, pushing the boundaries of what was considered constitutionally permissible, often to achieve his progressive reforms. His aggressive approach to trust-busting, breaking up industrial monopolies, and his pioneering efforts in conservation were driven by a profound personal belief in social justice and stewardship, rather than a mere adherence to party platforms. He once famously declared, "I did not usurp power, but I did greatly broaden the use of executive power," a clear articulation of his maverick philosophy. Imagine these presidents, driven by an inner fire, pushing against the heavy inertia of past practices and vested interests, constantly aware of their place in the weight of history, but determined to leave their own individual mark. This individuality's fire, though often controversial, remains a potent force within the American presidency, constantly testing the boundaries of precedent and shaping the ongoing narrative of executive power.